Morning, everyone, and Dr. Mr. thank you so much for your introduction. And I think it sets the perfect approach to what we'd like to achieve today. And you spoke about the environment in which we function as a research entity. And every now and then, something comes up that really impacts how we do our business to such a dramatic extent that we have to constantly debate as to its value and to its purpose and how does it change our behaviors. Artificial intelligence is definitely currently the biggest question that we have, and there's different, depending on who you ask, there's pros and cons to this. I know the undergrad lecturers really have a major problem with this, but from a research perspective, this might change. I have a number of questions that I'll give to each of the panel members. If you can keep it short and succinct, I'll appreciate that. And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Adam King. How does mathematics provide the foundation for AI algorithms and models?
Thank you so much for the questions. I'm quite very happy to be here. Good morning, everyone. Good. So, well, before I answer the questions, we first have to acknowledge that AI is a multidisciplinary field. It draws concepts from so many fields, but the back end and the heart of AI is mathematics. It uses concepts like statistics, probabilities, calculus, algebra, optimizations behind all these algorithms. So for example, in calculus, the very simple rate of change that we learn in first year, calculate the gradient of a function, it's used in AI to update parameters. Without this rate of change, our model cannot learn. That's a very simple mathematical tool. Again, if you look at the algebra part, we manipulate data via very huge tensors, high-dimensional tensors, and most of our variables are stored in matrices, vectors, and so on. When it comes to statistics, we at some point want to analyze the data. We want to interpret the data. We want to visualize the data. Statistical methods are used in this sense. And when it comes to optimization here in AI is used to find the best parameters in our model. For example, if we have to set some functions, generally we call this a loss function or the error functions, then at some point we have to try to optimize this function to minimize the error that the model is making. So there are a lot of concepts, mathematical concepts. When it comes to neural networks is based on graph theory. And there are just a lot of mathematical concepts like topology, geometry that is used in AI. So yeah, I think I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Professor Brown, what are the core components of an AI system?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, what a time to be alive. Exactly what Marcel just said about multidisciplinary stuff, right? AI really brings all of this together. I'm pretty sure that's why we're so diverse in the room at the moment in the first place. So number one thing that I can think of that's at the heart of machine learning or AI in this case is data. Without data, you can't do anything. So data, if you will, right? And data influences almost everything. It actually influences almost every other question that we're going to have about AI. That's probably going to follow, I'm assuming. But before we get to that, I'll tell you what the rest of AI system could contain. So first of all, you need data, such as if it's something to distinguish different people from each other, it's the person's face, for example, right? Or the person's biometric. That could be a kind of data. But the various kinds of data that you can use. The other thing that's very important is, of course, speaking more to Marcel stuff, and that's where computer science comes in. It lifts the mathematics and statistics to a high level of abstraction in the form of algorithms. So a procedural way of doing things. So the procedural way of doing things, you could put under the category of software. So software and algorithms. And then the last one, I would say hardware is very important. However, it has become a little bit less important in terms of what we need in front of us. So hardware is something you can now rent in the cloud. It's not something that you necessarily need to have at your institution anymore, which is quite interesting. I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Mr. Crom, what has been the most significant impact of AI on your research productivity and efficiency?
I mean, so I'm on the other spectrum. I'm the youth side. I mean, for me, it's helped the research process on different levels, right? It's helping others as well with stuff like finding literature, using stuff like Elicit, Perplexity, anything to find literature. I must also add an asterisk to it that it doesn't mean that you don't have to engage with the library's website, because the limitations are that these things aren't connected to what we subscribe to in the library always. So there are limits and caveats. But finding literature and getting a good idea of what's happening is a lot easier today than what it was 2 years ago. You can get a very good overview of literature in a snap of a finger. I mean, once you have it, reading stuff, you can use a couple of AIs to read. I don't use it to read. I use it to sort my literature. We all have a folder somewhere that says, oh, I must read this. And when you open it, there's PDFs in there dating back to 2001. I don't have that anymore because I've built a little GPT. I upload those things and it ranks the papers and says, you need to read this first because it's relevant to what I'm looking at. So it's given me that ease of sorting literature. Once I find the most important ones, I can also create a network of how these things are connected. And that's useful and important for judging quality and those type of things. That's like Research Rabbit, connected papers. Oh, there's so many. Then writing as well. I mean, writing is not just sitting and writing. I mean, I use Grammarly. It's helped me become more succinct and clear. Not all the time. It's not great all the time. But I've created another GPT that's my supervisor bot, which I've taken the work of my supervisor and trained this model on answering based on that work. Even conversations we've had, I've uploaded. So I can go back and have a conversation with my supervisor 4 o'clock in the morning, essentially. And that's important for writing. I mean, another one I've built is around my theory. So I get feedback from essentially the person who wrote the theory, because I've uploaded all their books. If it's a good practice in legal, I'm not sure, but yeah, at least the books are open source. Yeah, yeah, it helps in different spaces.
Thank you. If those books weren't open, they might be open now, it seems. Mr. Simanga, how can libraries play a more proactive role in supporting AI-driven research?
I think that this can happen in so many ways. So first, I think that libraries should probably have some form of an AI-related strategy in place, which explicitly advocates for a more proactive role in supporting AI-driven research. In the process of executing such a strategy, libraries need to at least conduct their own AI-driven scientific research, in my opinion. This would have the effect of helping them develop a better understanding of AI-driven research. Secondly, libraries can at least start off by addressing the low-hanging fruit, such as in the sense that more specifically, libraries can develop their own collections to include AI-related content, or they can develop and curate AI-related information resources that direct researchers to AI tools which support the consumption and production of such scientific research. Thirdly, I think that libraries need to partner with researchers who have a deep insight into the practical application of AI to research projects. Such partnerships could help librarians develop certain much needed skills. And then fourthly, I believe that libraries need to establish themselves as experts in particular niche areas within the broad AI landscape. And this could take the form of expanding upon an already existing core competency and then applying it within the context of AI. An example of this would be AI-powered content discovery. So librarians are essentially information practitioners. and they work in areas of information classification, information retrieval, as well as metadata creation and metadata management, amongst other things. But the data that AI rely on simply represent a lower level of abstraction of information. So within the context of this example, it is conceivable that libraries could play a quality management role, particularly in relation to an area such as metadata assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I continue with the questions, I just want to like to possibly ask Dr. Mstakazi. From what I hear, there's different opinions, different approaches, etc. And you spoke about working collectively. And I think what we need to do is establish a committee or subcommittee or a working group that can bring together these expert skills, because they're coming from different branches, different disciplines, different opinions, but it will provide us to create a standard and collective approach to AI at Rhodes.
Is that a question or a recommendation?
Both.
Or I can share that we are in the process of developing what was originally touted to be the Rhodes University ICT strategy, which is now morphing into the Rhodes University digitalization, or rather digital transformation strategy. And I think the AI conversation becomes part of that broader conversation. And I know that we are going to have colleagues from educational technologies, from library services, from media and comms, and from ICT, all sitting together and giving their recommendations. What I think we had not yet factored into that is getting in the discipline experts. And so I think that will be useful to include them in that work. But I am wary of more subcommittees and more working groups, and we have a lot of these. So I think let's work with the structures that we already have in place and rather co-opt people into the structures that we have, not create new ones.
Thank you. I think so. Your names have been listed to serve. Dr. Adam King, what are the key challenges and limitations in applying mathematical theories to real-world AI problems?
Well, I think, again, we should first acknowledge that mathematics is, like mathematical models are oversimplification of the real world. So most of the real world application might not comply with mathematical theory. So for example, here, sometimes our data comes with a lot of noise. Why we model this data, we don't have a proper model for this noise. This is a big challenge, and noise can come from different types of distributions. And since it's a real data, we can only assume or predict that this noise is coming from a Gaussian distribution or from a Poisson distribution and so on. So the main challenge is to model that type of noise. Our data also comes with a lot of missing samples. There's a big challenge in that we have to find ways to fill in this sample, or probably removing them. But at some point, we don't want to remove this sample, because while we remove them, we'll be decreasing our data. We need more data. AI are data-hungry tools. Another quite very big challenge when it comes to math with AI is the generalization of AI. So how do you train, for example, your kids at home to recognize, for example, the cats that you have at home in such a way that when your kid is out there, your kid should be able to recognize any type of cat. Probably your kid did not see all the different type of species of cat while you were training the kid at home. So how do we find a mathematical tool to measure that generalization and make sure that while we are training this AI model, when the AI model is deployed, it will generalize in any type of case. So again, another hot topic right now in AI when it comes to mathematics is the interpretability and explainability of the black box. So most of the tools out there, they are trained, the domain expert that are supposed to use these tools, they really don't know if this tool is really doing what they want. For example, a medical doctor, if the AI model is classifying, saying this is for example, a cancer, this type of cancer, we should be able to explain how this model is making that decision to say this is a cancer. And if the model is able to highlight the cancer and it confirms with what the medical expert think, then they will trust this model. So that's, again, a quite very big challenge when it comes to mathematics, how to make this model to generalize. Yeah, so there is just a lot of stuff in mathematics. So if you have questions, I will be happy to answer. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I've liked the fact that you've added the interpretability to the reliability and validity, etc., that we already follow in research. I think it's a good point. Prof. Brown, how do different AI techniques such as machine learning, deep learning, and neural networks differ in the approaches to problem solving?
Thank you. So that's a very interesting question, because when you think of machine learning, that is what deep learning is. So machine learning, deep learning is a newer way of doing machine learning, okay? And deep learning relies on a neural network. So that's the overview of everything over here. So all three of those things are very much linked, and they all come from machine learning. So what is machine learning? Because when we talk about AI, most of the time we're actually talking about machine learning over here. And machine learning is something that does not have to be explicitly programmed. It can learn based on experience, based on the data that you give it beforehand. And then it can try to generalize to a new problem, like Marcel said earlier. So its ability to generalize well to new problems is actually at the core of where your question comes from, because deep learning came along, which relied on neural networks, which functions very much similar to how the brain functions, right? It has neurons that fire at certain given times. Not everything in the brain is known. Now, this is different from explainable AI. Not everything in the brain is known. The brain is a very heavily studied matter, but it's still not understood properly. And the same with neural networks. Neural networks cannot be fully explained at a low level of abstraction, but at a high level of abstraction, it can be explained. So what is it? What does deep learning algorithms do? It takes neural networks with lots of lots of hidden layers, which is basically the unexplainable part. And it creates a much more generalizable model. So a model that can generalize to something that it hasn't seen before. That's what we mean by model generalization. And that's basically what it is in a nutshell. Yeah. So all of these are machine learning techniques, but deep learning is the newer version of it that relies on neural networks specifically, to summarize. Yeah.
Thank you for your response. Mr. Crom, have you encountered any unexpected challenges or limitations when using AI for your research? I mean, you already mentioned some of the aspects, but do you want to elaborate on this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I always say when I use an AI, it's like hugging somebody during COVID, right? You have to do it carefully. You know, you don't just hug everyone. It's the same principle. Hallucinations is a problem. That's probably going to be there for a while. There are models that people will eventually overcome some of the limitations, but I mean, it's something you can try and control for, but it's always going to be there. And the best way to mitigate that is to be an expert in what you're actually doing. So it's reading the work and understanding and being able to evaluate if this machine is lying or is this an actual finding? Is this something interesting? So that's the best defense. I mean, I've built GPTs where you can put up guardrails, you can say, don't connect to the internet, but guardrails are just that. They are rails. Rails can be broken, like rules. So that's definitely one big challenge. And I mean, the other one is nuances, especially I'm in education research. So when I use my GPT to summarize or to rank readings, if it's relevant or not, I've put in other questions when it builds the table where I can actually verify what it's saying. All right. So trust but verify. You know, you operate like this thing is a lawyer. You can't just trust it. You need to verify it. And that's the game. I mean, those are the two big problems. I mean, obviously there's bias depending on what you do. So if you ask it very nuanced questions, it's going to give you sometimes good answers and sometimes bad. But for my research, I tend to use it, but you need to evaluate constantly what you get from it. Yeah.
Thank you for your response. I realized through the previous three responses, the one person that might be missing here is a linguist, because our knowledge is structured using specific language, and that's always been an issue in how to express that language, and then how does it impact the context of the data, etc. Mrs. Manga, how can libraries stay ahead of the rapidly evolving landscape of AI technologies?
I think this is a bit of a tricky task due to the fast pace at which developments are taking place in the field of AI. But firstly, there are a few things libraries can consider. Firstly, libraries must conduct some kind of market research on a regular basis in order to at least remain knowledgeable about the emerging tools within the AI technologies landscape. Secondly, I think that libraries should at least digitally transform themselves, and that is to say that they need to deliberately and strategically reposition themselves at an organizational level whilst leveraging AI technology as an emerging form of technology, just in order to enhance their services and operations. The other things that I would like to point out is that libraries need to avoid being disrupted by such emerging technologies like AI. They actually need to embrace the technology. So this entails adopting AI tools and AI-powered technology. It may not be feasible for libraries to actually develop such tools outright due to the costs associated with AI adoption. So what would be prudent would be to rely on vendors. For instance, the library has vendors, and some of them actually have AI-powered tools. And examples of these are library discovery tools that are actually integrated with LLMs or generative AI. So an example of this would be something like Scopus AI, which is a tool that is designed to support scientific research. It's not necessarily a discovery tool, but it is a vendor-provided tool that has AI integrated into it. However, over time, a strategy must be in place, my personal opinion, to adopt some tools that can be used for free. For example, Elicit, which has already been mentioned, or Research Rabbit. Over time, though, I believe that libraries must have some in-house AI projects of their own, which allow them to develop AI solutions that are actually unique to their respective situations.
Thank you. Dr. Adam King, from your perspective as a mathematician, how is AI changing the nature of research?
Oh, thank you so much. So, well, to answer that question, I'll just go with a few examples that we saw recently, interdisciplinary research and collaboration. So we saw recently the Nobel Prize in Physics are AI scientists. So we see that AI can bridge like the gap between different fields. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry, also AI scientists, where they used AI to solve 50 years old problems in chemistry. So for me, that's wonderful. Researchers can collaborate between them now and make very new discovery using AI. Another example with AI is we saw recently AI model could distinguish female and male eyes just by looking at our eyes. And we researchers, we don't understand the type of features that this model are picking from our eyes. Those are quite very useful discovery. AI's model also recently could detect brain from cancer from brain tumor, why doctors are actually saying this patient is healthy. Those are very excellent discovery that AI can do. Again, today we can just stay in our lab, just in our computer and simulate real life. We don't need to go to the field to collect data at some point. We just use AI from our computer. We can build everything just from there. And from that type of simulation, we can do a lot of research and make a lot of discovery. So yes, there are just a lot that AI can do. I mean, we can't really list all of them. Yeah.
Thank you. It's quite clear that so it's accelerating research at a rapid pace. However, that brings its own concerns in terms of the humans being able to actually manage the research and the research flow. And later on, there will be concerns raised at the session. But I think it's a very valid point. So it's helping, but it's not slowing down things for us. It's making us work harder, actually, I think. Many ways.
Exactly.
Yes. Prof. Brown, Dr. Brown, what are the ethical implications of AI development and deployment?
Yeah, I would probably put bias on top of the list of those sort of things. But we need to understand very well that bias is not due to AI. It's not AI's fault or anything like that. I mean, there's a reason why I mentioned data so many times earlier. Data is the most important thing for AI to succeed. And I mean, even now, like your GPT engines, your Gemini stuff, etc., they are all based on long language models that synthesize internet. We don't have that sort of power yet, but they do. Obviously, that's a large corporate, right? So they have power. Back to the bias thing. So if it comes to humans, it's obviously race, it's gender, those kind of things that could be biased, depending on the type of data that you collect. If you collect a whole lot of data from a specific group, it's going to do very well at recognizing that group, but it's not going to do well at recognizing the groups that you fed very few samples to. And that's currently one of the biggest problems. Depending where you are in the world, it becomes a non-trivial problem to solve. This can be expanded to anything, any animal species. Some species are underrepresented. It's very difficult to fix that problem where you can only find 10 of a specific, or 10 samples of a species over a 5-year period, whereas another species is like there's millions of it within a 1-minute period. Being able to detect or classify all those different kinds of things becomes unreliable because of that. And that's not necessarily where hallucinations come from. Hallucinations is a bit of a separate topic, but they are closely related. Depending on how you collect the data, hallucinations can form, it can come up with its own things and make up things. So we need to be very, not necessarily concerned, but just our eyes need to always be open. And like Neil said earlier, we always have to verify, validate the stuff ourselves. We still need to be the domain experts, right? We can't just rely on AI and be like, this is correct because AI says so. It's the biggest mistake I think that we can make.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing is that it actually accentuates the existing biases even more than previous. And that's one of the concerns you have, is that we have to then look at the data itself and start adding to the data. And I think from my perspective, at least, the research that I've been doing is we have to look at Africanization, decolonization at a whole different level in order to enable better data sets. Mr. Crom, how can academic support services best equip researchers to harness the power of AI?
I mean, like Dale said, it needs data. We actually just need access to some of these. You know, curating certain lists would be really helpful. There's a lot of these things that are scam sites where once you put in your credit card, you are all of a sudden buying coffee in Dubai and wherever, and those type of things. So it's curating that. And I mean, there's a whole ethical and data security, the entire element to that. And I think it's about, you know, providing guidance and workshops and sharing sessions and hands-on use of the tools. I mean, there are so many, but I think it's around directing them to say, you know, we need to find literature. These are really good tools. Let's show you how they work. Let's talk about the limitations, but let's click through them. Let's show you what they can do, what they can't do. So it needs theoretical, ethical, and practical intervention.
Thank you for your response. I think I agree 100% with that. Mrs. Simanga, how can libraries best equip researchers to harness the power of AI?
My response will probably tie in with what Zakram just mentioned now. I think that firstly, libraries actually, rather librarians need to consider upskilling themselves so that they can become more familiar with AI. If they do not actually have a good understanding of AI, it would be rather difficult to support the deployment of the technology. Secondly, They need to provide researchers with access to AI-powered tools, especially where costly subscriptions are required in order to access such tools. So where such tools are freely accessible, this task should actually be easier. Thirdly, I think that libraries need to adjust the type of training that is provided to support scientific research. So in short, researchers need to be able to perform the information screening process. When they seek information, they need to perform that process effectively, even when they're using AI-powered tools. They need to be aware of the pitfalls associated with using such tools. For example, bias and hallucinations, which have already been mentioned by my colleagues here. And fourthly, libraries also need to participate in the development of AI-related technological solutions that can enhance scientific research. So you have things like multiple literacies in terms of training in the library sector, but you have things like data and information literacy, which should be taught, but on their own, they're actually insufficient. They should be supplemented by a domain-specific form of AI literacy, as well as knowledge related to fields such as concept formation, information behavior, and perhaps more importantly, machine information behavior, which is a subset of information behavior. But insofar as generative AI is concerned, for example, effective prompt engineering is a skill that should be taught and developed by libraries in order to equip researchers to harness the power of AI.
Thank you, Samuel. There are 4 more questions, but I would like to change something here because I think you've responded quite well to the limitations and opportunities and challenges of AI through your various responses. So I'd like to ask each presenter, panelist in turn, if there's one thing you can add to your environment to allow you to better do research on AI. You've got a panel of people here, you've got the DVC sitting here. What's the one thing that you want to be added to your environment to help you with the research in AI?
Oh, thank you so much. Wonderful question. And also very happy that the DVC is here. Obviously, I'm a researcher. I want funding. Yes, I want funding if, if I have enough funding, I'm probably going to do a lot.
All right. So we can expect your proposal to be submitted soon. A funding proposal. Dr. Brown, Professor Brown, over to you, the same question. What would you like to see possibly change at Rhodes so that we can better harness the power of AI? What do you need in your environment? What can we do?
Yeah, it's not super controversial, but remember earlier I said hardware is one of the core components. Having the hardware in front of you does have a lot of pros as well, but getting certain hardwares, getting access to certain data and things like that is not always easy, based on the current regulations over here, based on a certain, but there's a buyer's list, right, that you have to use for procurement. It's quite restrictive at times, and that's currently one of the big limitations. So, yeah.
Thank you. Neil?
A ChatGPT license will transform whatever you do. I mean, something simple, a simple Gen AI to use would be sufficient, I think, for most people, because you can either build what you need or you'd be able to figure out or build something much better than just buying a whole bunch of services. So yeah, for me, it's a ChatGPT license has changed how I work in everything, actually. Yeah.
I would have to say money, and I'll elaborate on why. I think money can solve a lot of problems. The hardware issue that has been mentioned here is really true. From a library perspective, I mean, if you could have hardware that actually allows you to build your own tools, you need funding for that. I mean, the computing costs associated with training data sets are actually monstrous. The GPUs cost quite a lot. And from the perspective of most African universities, it's actually just not affordable. But since you asked about a wish list, that's what I would actually state. I would say money to actually buy these GPUs and then do the training ourselves. I think that there's that whole thing of looking at proprietary versus open source LLMs. I would favor at least being able to to work with open source LLM simply because you get to pierce that black box and actually you can actually work with the algorithms. You can actually see the models. You can actually see the training data sets. These are things that you cannot see when working with the proprietary tools, but you need money once again, because even with the proprietary tools such as the ChatGPTs or Gemini or Grok, the thing is, in order to process the tokens and all of these prompts, it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money, and it might be cheaper to do it with the open source option instead of having, let's say, a campus-wide license. So I think money to actually be invested in the infrastructure or access to funding through from research funders, that could probably help to solve that question, that issue.
Thank you. Dr. Amke, you still have one response to add?
Yes, I just want to, yes, also, mention that collaborations and between colleagues, departments at the universities is very important. If there is a way that the university can find ways to support this and make it, easy, because collaborations are quite very difficult. I've realized that in the institution. Someone like me, I need data. And when I look around me, I see that there are a lot of colleagues in different departments who have data that I can use. And that will bring a lot of publications, but it's actually very, very difficult to break that bridge and start working with that data. I think that type of support, interdisciplinary research in the university facilitate that would be amazing also.
Thank you for your response. I hear what you're saying. I just want to ask Mr. Simango to specifically speak about the ethical part of AI, because what I see immediately is you've got your consumers of the data, you've got the people who apply the processes, and etc. And we sit with a lot of data, and we're also looking at research data management, for instance. So what's the ethical implications for something like this?
That's it's an interesting question. So it's sort of like two-pronged, right? And I don't know how much time I have to answer this. 2 minutes, okay. So there's the machine ethics aspect, and there's also the human ethics aspect, because you have humans working with machines. And so on the one hand, if you look at the humans, they should at least be aware of ethical implications, for instance, of working with personal information or personal identifiers. You don't want to just upload that as part of a prompt into a system, and then all of a sudden your data are actually somewhere else in a server overseas. But at the same time, they should be mindful when they're working with the machines that there's a certain type of behavior that I'm particularly interested in when you look at machine ethics, the machine behavior in terms of how the machine actually behaves. Does it actually behave in a way that complies with the data privacy laws and the intellectual property laws? These are not necessarily ethical issues per se, these are more legal, but sometimes people do blur the lines. But the thing is, one should be able to assess the trustworthiness of a machine. Can you actually validate whether or not a machine does what it's supposed to do? Can you specify the requirements? Can you interrogate those requirements? Can you validate whether the machine actually does what is stipulated that it would do? These are things that people have to take into consideration. But in short, I'll summarize it by saying that you need to be able to consider whether or not the machine can actually be trustworthy based on human criteria. That's probably a bit more important than just the human ethics aspect of it.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to go over to some of the questions we received from our online participants. Ashraf Ratcliffe, question to the panel, nobody in specific, so you can volunteer if you want to answer. Is a research data management system for academic research essential for AI strategy, for an AI strategy for academic institutions, library support services?
That's quite an interesting one. I think it would help. I've actually never looked at particularly that way. But if you listen to what has been said right now, in the sense that what underlies what AI does is actually data. So if you're actually trying to manage data within a library setting, you should at least have a strategy that talks to that. And I've seen many research data management policies out there. in the past, they haven't actually addressed the AI issue. So you don't want to actually separate these two. In a library setting, if you're actually trying to address AI and RDM, you might actually want to put those two together. But stating that, I should point out that it's not as if AI introduces any special issues about data privacy, for instance, or intellectual property. If you look at it from a legal perspective, there might be issues dealing with data documentation that might differ, because in traditional research, you have things like README files, you have data dictionaries, and you can literally trace the source of the data. But when people use prompt engineering and they get the prompts from, let's say, ChatGPT, there is no required data documentation. You can't really tell where the data came from. So these are things that should actually be taken into account, let's say nowadays, if people are actually updating or creating data management policies. But I'd say that you should try to, if you're writing an AI policy, you cannot ignore the research data management aspect. In fact, you cannot ignore data per se, hence why you actually have to look at the RDM aspect.
Thank you. Another question to the panel. What are the elements of an AI strategy for academic libraries to guide the implementation of an in-house AI project, including to select key AI research tools for use by researchers to support academic research? Which AI research tools are high on the list of recommended tools? So,
okay, let me attempt this one. So the interesting thing is this. I'll go back to that machine information behavior thing. If you look at several tools out there, you'll see like Grok, ChatGPT, Gemini AI. These things are actually marketed in terms of how many billions of or number of parameters they've been trained on. And there's several other criteria that if you look at the literature, you'll see. But never will you see anything telling you how trustworthy the LLM actually is. So that's something that you actually have to take into consideration. What is the criteria that you want to tick off as a checklist based on the machine's behavior? And I keep referring to the software as machines. There has to be a criteria in terms of what will constitute a trustworthy machine, and then you can build a policy around that. In fact, you can select your tools based on that, not necessarily based on the specifications of how good the tool can actually perform, because it can probably give you answers in, let's say, milliseconds as opposed to a second, but the response could be biased, or it actually, it can hallucinate, and there are all sorts of hallucinations. Or you might not have a feedback mechanism that allows you to actually indicate the degree to which the AI response was actually biased. So those are things that you should actually look at. How does the machine actually behave, in my personal opinion, and use that as a benchmark or starting point for creating your criteria.
Thank you. Just would like to respond to that, would add to it? Not? Over to the, can't say live audience, but the in-person audience, that's the right term. Any questions to the panel? I'm not sure if everybody's shocked at silence, but I think what is very important, and one of the reasons I asked the one question was that it relates to the strategy that the DVC spoke about. There is a question I've noted, and I think a lot of what you said in terms of funding, infrastructure, skills, training, all of it adds and needs to be reflected in that digital transformation strategy. I think that's the only way we can collectively attain the kind of output we would want in our research excellence. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. My question now is on behalf of students. Firstly, I have identified that on my honors research, there's over-reliance on machine translation. However, if you talk of translating a text from English to isiXhosa, the non-mother tongue students are not able to depict or to see these discrepancies and limitations. And then my question now is, what's the position of the university in terms of undergraduate utilization of machine translation? Secondly, I'm a lecturer for teaching tools and technologies to in-service teachers. They're from rural areas, Limpopo and Northern Cape, which is Kurumani and other small towns surrounding areas. They are relying on AI translation or AI tools? What's the position of the university? Because as a lecturer or as a junior lecturer, I cannot allow them to conform or fully rely on these tools because I can identify these discrepancies. What's the position of the university? Because I'm scared to say to them, you can't utilize these tools because the university will charge you. There's going to be a case opened against you and this and that. What's the position? What is it? What can we say to the students rather?
All right, that's an interesting question. Thank you so much. Sorry, can I just ask your name? Thank you. Which panelist would like to respond to the fifth one?
Yes. I think that's a very difficult question. I will just take a very simple example myself, how I deal with this with my students. I make sure to read what they provide to me before it goes out there. Sometimes I'm even able to detect and pick that a student used ChatGPT. So that's the only thing we can do so far. Unfortunately, there is no way or an additional tool that we intercept between maybe the student and the tools to explain what is going on. You know, it just shows that AI, yes, we cannot fully trust this model for what they are doing. It still needs our intervention at some point. Me with my student, I stand in the intersection between the tools and my student, and I check the work and make sure that everything is correct.
Just working, yeah. You need to keep in mind that these tools are assistive technologies, right? They are not meant to be relied on 100%. But on that note, I agree with you. It would be nice to have some sort of language expert over here that could be fed this sort of information. So the supervisors that have multilingual students or students that are relying on AI technologies to translate what they're doing or to help writing, right? It'd be nice to have that sort of central person there or central people there that can be fed this information and shown that, oh, in this specific discipline, we'd use these kind of words over here, but the translation is completely destroying what we're trying to say over here. So I do think some sort of dedicated, I'm not going to call it a task force or some sort of dedicated language team should be considered by the university.
Yeah, I mean, it is a difficult question, but I think there's a deeper question that I want to ask you, all right? Because I had a conversation with somebody who was doing translation as a subject for master students. And they had exactly the same problem is, well, my students are relying on this. The problem is you're translating probably from an English to an Afrikaans or an English to an isiXhosa, and those models are not as well defined as the English models. I mean, that might change. Northwest is busy working on that. University of Pretoria has got a department that's working on those type of models. But I think the most important question is, does it matter? All right. And I'm not saying like in a facetious way. What matters in that engagement that your students are doing? Is it about them translating? Is that the knowledge that they need to show? Or is it that they're going to actually work in a world where they are going to use these things? And maybe we should shift our focus into how you should be doing that, all right? There's a document on rethinking assessment that talks, Mags Blackie talks about assessment and learning as a bridge, right? We start on the one end where we know nothing and the idea is to get to the other side. But there are other things that are going to be more valuable in terms of this. And language is particularly important. English departments right across the world are having this conversation because ChatGPT can sound like Shakespeare, right? It can interpret it much better than most people can. So it's really thinking about what's the knowledge that matters. and focusing on that and working back. Because the world is fundamentally different today than 2 years ago.
Sorry, Neil, just to add to it, thank you. I know I'm supposed to moderate and not. One of the key things, and I believe in, is that we have to ensure that all our knowledge is expressed in all languages, because within a semantic web environment, without the expression of a concept in a specific language, you cannot have an accurate translation in a non-semantic environment. So these data sets are also being fed through semantic knowledge frameworks. We can take one more question. So I see a number of hands, but there's time. I know your hand was first. Right?
And the thing that occurred to me was the gap between PhD candidates who are learning those skills and those who are not, and how that gap is going to be. I think one of the things that I thought is, how are we teaching our postgraduate students to utilize this knowledge and skills and methods connections?
Yeah, I think that is exactly the problem, right? And I think via the CPJs, I think we've done 3 or 4 workshops on this. Some departments have requested talks with postgrads as well. And I think where those talks happen, the behavior is a little bit different. The problem is we cannot shy away from these tools. We can put rules up, all right, and say, don't use it. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's just, I think we live in that world where I'm going to say we have to go to PE, but none of us are allowed to drive. All right. That's a problem. Now, it's going to take me 2 weeks to get there. Right. And I think this is the problem that we're sitting in. We're in that middle point where the technology is going to change what we do, but we need to figure out what that means. What is going to be the skill that matters? So even if I'm not learning it, how are we putting things in place to get students to at least snap that? And that's why I always talk about evaluative judgment. It's being able to evaluate things. But to do that, I need the knowledge to be able to evaluate. So they need to be pushed into that space. I mean, when I started using a lot of these Gen AIs in December 2022, my use then and my use now is 2 different things, right? Yeah. So it went from magic to, well, it's good, but, right? There's always a but. Yeah. So I think it's just about getting to that point. And I'm not talking about limits. Limits are going to be broken. I really think so. I mean, the guys to my right, I don't know, maybe, but yeah, limits are not something we should focus on.
Thank you so much for your response. One last question before we have a break.
Okay, thank you so much. Just to appreciate the point that Melissa made about language, because for departments that are taking multilingualism seriously, it seems to other colleagues to be a threat. So for instance, a colleague who received 6 essays in isiZulu for a politics 1 course, 5 of those were AI plagiarized. So what the students do is to bypass getting caught by translating their responses into isiZulu. And when you have a lecturer who can't read the language, I mean, she was so frustrated because it takes hours for her to do the detective work. So for someone like me who can read the language, they have to think twice. But it does, I have a fear that then multilingualism will be left to the academics who can understand the language, where some lecturers say, actually, I can't accept work written in another language because it will take me a good hour or 2 to do the investigative work. And that's not really the point. But even for me, that's in a context where I had a 66% failure rate. So of course, they're doing it in English, they're doing it in other languages as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think that perfectly sums up the kind of challenges that we have. Thank you to the panelists. I have something small to give each of you, but from our side, really, thank you so much. This has been a really invigorating conversation, so a conversation that will not end here. Please engage. please look out for the digital transformation strategy and how we can fit into the various groups and talk to each other. Thank you so much. Thank you.